I'm Mary Jo Emde, the CEO of Results Workplace Coaching in South Africa. I just recently presented a book review for Stellenbosch University on Your Brain at Work by the author David Rock, one of his books around the neuroscience of leadership and how to optimally use your brain in effective management, collaborating with others and facilitating change. David is an amazing person. He brought out 4 books so far. This is his 4th book. And he's got an incredible ability to make something very complex, the brain, the neuroscience, very complex into something you and I can understand. It is a fabulous read. It's very easy. It's a story. It's based on the lives of 2 people, Emily and Paul. And it tells you in 2 acts what they're doing. The take 1 is when they're doing it wrong, when they don't understand the brain. Take 2 is when they've been briefed on how to optimize the brain and how to think about what they're doing and showing you how effective it can be. David talks about 4 acts. I don't know where this whole thing about acts came from, but he linked this book around having a director on the stage and managing the stage, which is the prefrontal cortex. The first act that he talks about is about how do we, as leaders, solve problems and make decisions more effectively. Second act is how do we stay cool under pressure. Third act, collaborating with others, and lastly, facilitating change. Now, these 4 acts that he talks about also form part of the Neuroleadership Institute's 4 domains. So there's a lot of research that David refers to in his book, especially at the end of the book, on where he got his information from. We have 2 memories. We have a working memory and we have a long-term memory. The working memory is the memory that sits behind your eyes. It's called the prefrontal cortex, used to understand things. It is used to make decisions. It's used to recall long-term memory, and it's also used to inhibit behaviors that is inappropriate. So when we work on this prefrontal cortex all day long, which you'll find in the first act and take 1 that the actors are exhibiting, they're actually overloading the prefrontal cortex. And the reason for that is it can only hold a few pieces at a time. When the working memory holds intentions, I have to do this when I get to the office. Oh, I must remember, and women, we'll know about it, Mom. I have to remember to make sure my child has packed everything. So we have all these intentions that we're holding, and what David talks about is the actors. We have actors on the stage in the working memory that take up playtime. So we have to learn how to park some of the actors off the prefrontal cortex so that we can actually optimize the working memory. Just to talk about the working memory, it uses most of the energy of the brain. The brain is about 2% of the body mass of the body, and it uses 20% of the energy. So it uses a lot of energy. It's small, like I mentioned. It's also serial. So it works with a very if this, then that. It likes to have a process in place. It's not creative. It's very fussy. It has to have the right neurotransmitters in place for the neurons to work. We have a limited bucket of resources for activities like decision making, impulse control, and when we use them up, we don't have much left for the next action. In his book, he talks about 3 levels of functioning and thinking. What do we do the first thing when we get into the office? We all know we start checking emails, and then we get hooked into the emails, and then we start doing everything else, and then 4 o'clock this afternoon we'll say, oh my gosh, I have a proposal to do, let me quickly try and do that. And I'm not standing up here saying don't check emails. The reality is emails is part of our working day. We have to manage the emails. We have to compartmentalize it, to say, let me check them and look what is important, work on what is important, now knowing that I have a limited bucket of resources. I have to manage this bucket of resources. We juggle too many things at once. Multitasking is a myth. Ladies, I'm sorry. to actually disappoint you and put you in a bad light here. But multitasking is a myth. When we're multitasking, we're actually on autopilot. We're using our long-term memory because cognitively the brain cannot do two things at a time. It cannot have a difficult conversation on a cell phone and navigate to a new place. You're either going to miss your turn off, or you're going to say to the person on the other side of the phone things that are not really making sense. So when you're multitasking, you are basically doing stuff that you've hardwired. Lucky for us, we have what we call the free won't, and David talks about that. This was a study done by Libet in 1983, and it's been around, as you can see, for quite a long time. The brain has the power to intervene. It does not have a choice. 0.3 seconds. If I do this to my finger, my brain sends a signal to my finger to say, I need to move. It's 0.3 seconds that signal takes. We have 0.2 seconds to decide whether we're actually going to move or not. So we don't have a choice whether the signal comes. We have 0.2 seconds to decide what to do with the signal. Okay. And a lot of the work around mindfulness is focusing on getting that 0.2 seconds harnessed, practicing the brain like a gym muscle, like going to gym, practicing that muscle so that you can focus on that 0.2 second more often than not. So there's a zone of peak performance. In the book, David talks about you need some stress to get out of bed. If you didn't have stress, you'd be staying in bed all day. There's a zone. Too much stress actually physically harms the body. There's a lot of research going on around what continual stress does to you. It releases cortisol. It releases adrenaline. You get addicted to adrenaline. And physiologically, the brain's memory system, the hippocampus, decreases. It becomes smaller. So that peak zone is about getting interested. Too much arousal is not too good. Individually, we have different peak performances, and we have to find that flow, that just right, that Goldilocks space. The prefrontal cortex is also a very noisy part of the brain. It's like a rock concert. It goes and goes, and especially if you're stressed, it's even noisier. When we have data wanting to come out and wanting to solve a problem, it's like a little cell phone ringing at the bottom in your pocket in a rock concert. It's ringing, but you can't hear it. So quietening down the prefrontal cortex helps us to hear those little cell phones, and that is what we call insights. 60% of problems are solved in a way that people can't explain. It's not because you've actually thought about it. When do you have insights? It's that space where the rock concert is actually resting, they're taking a break. And that's when you have insights. And I'd like to illustrate to you what insights are about. It's that variable that improves the ability to detect weak associations. And that is Mark Beeman in the Neuroleadership Journal talks about that. The second act that David talks about is staying cool under pressure. Leaders don't need to do that, am I right? Nah. Been there, done that. So when you actually have an emotional response, you lose cognitive ability. You've seen that when you're actually responding emotionally immediately and you haven't used that 0.2 seconds to say, hold on, what is this about? Let me actually think about it. Let me not just become primal and defend myself. The brain, this emotional brain, has a primary function of detecting threat and reward. When the limbic system is activated, you see it as a threat. We generalize more. However, we in the workplace can't react anymore. We're not attacked by tigers, even though we sometimes think we are. We aren't being attacked by tigers. We actually have a cognitive ability which we need to use. We err on the side of pessimism because the brain is designed to do that. It is designed to keep us alive. It also impacts the working memory, derailed by drama, and we drown in uncertainty. And what I want to show you now is that the brain's toward or away function, which I explained to you is the primary function, the away threat function is always stronger. I don't know, has anybody heard about the SCARF model? It's a very, very powerful model that we can use to explain the functioning of this towards or away operation of the brain. The third act, collaborating with others, goes around the concept of SCARF. Managing that social being either as an away or a towards reaction. So when I engage with you in a one-on-one or in a group context, am I creating an away response between you and me, or am I creating an engaging response? So the first element that they talk about is status. Every single one of us in this room this morning when we walked in allocated ourselves a status. A status in relation to our peers, a status in relation to who we are. And when that status is threatened, you actually have a limbic response which creates an away feeling. When I pick on you, you actually lose status, your perception of status. So you start to feel valued less. And we do that in the workplace all the time. Certainty. When you don't know where you're going, you predict the worst. I would like to see you in my office, please. What do you predict? Not that you've done well. You predict, what have I done wrong? Autonomy. The brain likes to predict and have a say in what's going to happen. When you take away the choices of people, you create a limbic response. When I say to you, this is what I want you to do, and that's the way it's done, I will do it because of a threat response, physical threat, I'm going to lose my job, but I won't engage. Relatedness. We're constantly forming in and out groups. So we have to find ways in the workplace to bring people into our in-group and find that relatedness so that we can collaborate with them and not see them as foe, because the brain's default is always foe. The last part of the SCARF model is the fairness model, the fairness point. And fairness is about perception. We don't wake up. Who wakes up in the morning saying, I want to see who I can treat unfairly today? Anybody woke up today saying, I'm going to see who I can treat somebody unfairly? Yet, we are perceived as treating people unfairly. Do you agree? People will think, why did you do that to me? That was unfair. So, how do we overcome this in the workplace? We have this perception of unfairness. We have to realize that that initial perception, that fight or flight, is a reality. The context is what's going to create the bringing back the cognitive abilities. Facilitating change is the last part of his book, where he talks about focusing on something. Be careful what you focus on. If you focus on the negative, you hardwire the negative. The more attention you focus on something, the more you hardwire it. The brain has got neuroplasticity, and if you're able to refocus your attention on the positive, on what it is you want to create, you will be able to create those new wirings. The brain is an amazing organ that it can actually change shape by focusing on something, paying it attention. These are just some of the resources besides the Your Brain at Work. The neuroleadership.org forum we also run that locally in South Africa, so if you're interested in joining the forum, just give us a shout. So thank you very much for your time. It was wonderful being in the room with you, and I apologize, Laura, for putting you on the spot. And thank you very much. I'll be around if you wanted to ask me any questions.